Hey, greetings everybody, Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We are going to now plow our way into the second half of the of Blood and Honor. So we last left off with the second in command of Tirion Fordring, whatever his name was, starts with a B, and he is little B. He basically snitched and sold his own leader out, and he's not 100% wrong, but they definitely make you not like him. That caused Satan, I don't know how you want to pronounce it, Sidon, to come from Stratholme and investigate. They found the orc, and Tirion felt like he had to defend him, so they considered that treasonous. Now both Tirion and the orc are being called off to trial in Stratholme. Investigation, interrogation, trial. Stay a while and listen to Chapter 5. It is called The Trial of Will. Tirion sat in a small holding cell that was adjacent to the Hall of Justice, where his trial was to be held. Through a small window cut high into the cell's wall, he could hear the sounds of commerce and activity emanating from the bustling marketplace of Stratholme. Periodically, he heard hammering sounds coming from the main square. The city's clamorous sounds were very different from the relaxing rural din of Mardenhold Keep. Fervently, he wished he were back there now. He had no idea how his trial would go, but he had the distinct impression that no matter what happened in the court, his life would be irrevocably changed. He thought about his family and the life of affluence and ease he'd share with them. Despite himself, he wondered if he hadn't thrown it all away on a fanciful, selfish whim. He had been held in custody for 3 days. Today he was to be tried for treason against the land he had spent his life defending. He could scarcely believe it, but depending on what the court decided, he could face either execution or spending the rest of his days in prison. Karandra would never forgive him for taking such a risk for the sake of honor alone. He wondered if he'd be able to forgive himself if his wife was forced to raise their son alone. He laughed softly to himself. He always believed that the only thing that could possibly keep him from his loved ones was the enemy. What have I done? He asked himself over and over. He was surprised to hear footsteps echo through the adjacent corridor. Surely the proceedings haven't started yet, he thought miserably. He heard the guards outside the door question someone as the latch clicked and the door opened. Arden walked somberly into the room. Tirion brightened somewhat and shook his friend's hand. "It's good to see you, Arden. Have you been home since my arrest? Have you spoken with my wife?" he asked hurriedly. Arden shook his head and motioned for Tirion to sit down on his cot. "No, they won't allow me to leave until the trial is finished, my lord," the captain stated flatly. "I don't know if Karandra has been told or not." Tirion scowled. He knew she must be beside herself with worry. "What of the orc?" Tirion asked. "What did they do with him?" Arden tensed. "Why do you care, Tirion? It is your enemy. I don't understand why you're so concerned about it. There's no way the creature would have saved your life. It's a mindless brute," Arden spat. Tirion looked him square in the eye. "Just answer me, Captain," Tirion said as calmly as he could. He had to watch his tone. Arden might be the only friend he had left. "They've been interrogating the creature for the past few nights," Arden said. "Apparently didn't offer up anything they didn't already know. I heard some of the local guards boasting about how they'd beaten the hell out of it. They're going to hang the wretched beast tomorrow morning in the square." Tyrion's heart sank. Eitrigg was going to die, and it was all his fault. Somehow he had to find a way to make amends, to put things right. Arden sensed Tyrion's tension. "My lord, they might execute you for this," Arden began. "If you confess and claim that you lost your senses, maybe they'll relent and let you go. Surely this matter isn't worth dying for. You're a Lord Paladin for the light's sake. People depend on you. You've got to snap out of this," the captain finished heatedly. Tirion only shook his head. "I can't, Arden. It's a matter of honor. I swore to protect the orc, and I betrayed that vow. Whatever punishment they charge me with, it is well deserved." Arden ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "This makes no sense, Tirion. Think about your wife and child," Arden yelled. Tirion stood up to face him. "I am, old friend. What kind of example would I set for my son if my word counted for nothing? What kind of a man would I be seen as then?" Tirion asked. Arden turned away, bristling. "It's not that simple, and you know it," the captain bellowed. "Just admit that you made a mistake. Admit that you were wrong to side with the orc, and they might be lenient."
Why do we even have to discuss this? Have you lost all sense, man?
Just then the door opened and 2 guards stepped in. "You'll have to leave now, Captain," one of the guards said. "We are to escort the prisoner to the hall now." Arden gave Tirion a last pleading look and marched out the door in a huff. Tirion straightened and attempted to look as proud and confident as he could. "I am ready, gentlemen," he said to them. They bound his hands and led him outside. The bright midday sun caused Tirion to wince slightly. His limbs were tired and cramped from the past few days of inactivity. The guards marched him across the square toward the imposing structure of the Hall of Justice. Out of the corner of his eye, Tirion caught sight of the gallows scaffolding being erected. He surmised that it was the source of the hammering he had been hearing. Briefly, he visualized Atrix standing upon the gallows with a rope tied around his neck. Tirion had to work hard in order to keep his forced semblance of confidence. If Atrix died, then all his efforts would have been for nothing. An hour later, Tirion was seated in a large oaken chair in the middle of the polished courtroom floor. Before him was an immense stage adorned with 4 throne-like chairs. At the center of the stage, directly in front of him, was a large lectern where the judge would conduct the trial. Above the stage was an enormous white flag bearing a stylized blue letter L, which signified the Alliance of Lordaeron. Lining the vast walls of the chamber were other huge banners representing the 7 nations of the Alliance. A large blue banner embroidered with a golden lion signified the kingdom of Stormwind. Another banner, black with a red gauntleted fist, represented the kingdom of Stromgard. Tirion was too nervous to look around at the others. And we know Stromgard's actually on the way out. I don't know if they've officially seceded from the Alliance yet, but if not, they're really close. They mentioned that they're going to in Chronicles. Though he could not bear to turn around and see his comrades' accusing faces, he could hear 100 voices whispering and muttering at once throughout the grandiose chamber. Through the din, he discerned that everyone in attendance was shocked to hear that he had betrayed them. Many of the onlookers had served under his command during the war, and many others he considered to be good friends. He could feel their communal confusion and scorn buffet him in waves. His trial would not be an easy one. Far to his right, he caught sight of Bartholus sitting in attendance. The young paladin had a condemning look in his eyes. He gazed intently at Tirion. Tirion wondered why the youth had turned on him so completely and been so eager to see him disgraced. He turned away from Bartholus as another armored paladin made his way to the front of the stage.
"Defenders of Lordaeron," the paladin said in a clear voice, "today we stand in judgment of one of our own. The trial of Lord Tirion Fordring will now commence."
Tirion realized that his palms were sweating. He had to physically restrain himself from shaking. He knew that the 4 jurors would enter the hall soon. Every major trial in Lordaeron was presided over by 4 of the highest-ranking lords within the Alliance. Tirion was sure that he'd recognize many of them as his peers. The attendant onlookers hushed as the first of the jurors entered.
"Oh, hail Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore of Cool Terrace," the paladin said as the tall, lanky figure walked across the stage.
Lord Proudmoore took the throne-like seat on the far right with a look of disquiet on his proud face. Tirion knew Proudmoore well. Despite being a tactical genius, the Lord Admiral was one of the greatest heroes of the war. His officer's uniform and large ceremonial hat were deep blue and adorned with golden medals and pins signifying his rank as Master of the Alliance's navies. The paladin spoke again.
"All hail Archmage Antonidas of the Majocracy of Dalaran," he said as the second juror strode in.
A hush descended upon the crowd as the mysterious wizard took his seat. His lavender-hooded robe was adorned with black and gold trim, and he carried a great polished staff in his hands. Ever distrustful of magic, Tirion hadn't had many dealings with wizards over the years, and was somewhat disconcerted to find that his fate was now in the hands of one. He looked back to the paladin as the last 2 jurors were announced. The venerable Archbishop Alonzus Fowl, who had anointed Tirion as a paladin long ago, walked in and took a seat next to the lectern. Following the Archbishop was the young Prince of Lordaeron, Arthas, who had only recently been made a full paladin. Tirion had never met the young prince before, but he could see that the handsome youth radiated goodness and wisdom despite his relatively young age. Tirion wished fervently that Bartholus had had the prince's composure days before. With the jurors assembled, the paladin motioned for everyone to rise for the judge's entrance. All of the attendant men and women rose as Uther the Lightbringer entered the hall and walked forward to the ornate lectern. The mighty holy patron of the Knights of the Silver Hand scanned the assembly with stern eyes the color of ocean storms. His ornately etched silver armor seemed to reflect every light source in the vast hall, bathing Uther in a halo of shimmering beauty. Uther was the first paladin, and was held to be the mightiest warrior amongst the armies of the Alliance. He was also held to be the wisest and most noble of all the holy paladins. Everyone in the room was cowed by his commanding presence. Tyrion's mind reeled. Up until that point he was resolved to stand by his decision and accept his fate with honor, but looking up at the stern visage of his powerful superior, his courage wavered. Perhaps Arden was right, he thought frantically. Maybe he should beg for the court's mercy and forget that he ever made a vow to an enemy of humanity. Yeah, that shouldn't be in italics. It's because it's not first person. His thoughts were disrupted as the Lightbringer's powerful, melodious voice filled his ears. Lord Paladin Fordring, Uther began, you are charged with treason against the Alliance and failing to obey a direct order given to you by your superior. As you know, this is a dire charge. The noble lords gathered here will hear your case and judge you accordingly under the light. How do you plead to the charges against you? Tirion clenched his fists to keep them from shaking. He barely found the voice to answer. I am guilty as charged, my lord. I accept full responsibility for my actions, Tirion said. 100 angry voices flooded the room at once. Apparently, many of the onlookers had believed the charges to be greatly exaggerated or false. The assembly was shocked to hear Tirion admit his guilt so openly. Tirion looked behind him to watch the crowd's raucous reaction. He caught sight of Arden sitting right behind him. The captain's tortured expression seemed to plead to Tirion to reconsider his position. Tirion had to look away. Arden believed in him and had always served him loyally, but the captain would never understand. Uther's voice boomed out as the mighty paladin commanded the assembly to silence. The gathered host went quiet, as if it had been struck by lightning. Tirion could almost feel an electrical tension in the air. He braced himself. Very well, Uther said evenly. Let the record show that Lord Paladin Fordring has entered a plea of guilty. Tirion watched as the 4 jurors conversed amongst themselves for a brief moment. Lord Proudmoore ended the discussion and motioned for Uther to continue. Let Lord Commander Saidin Dathrahan come forward and give his testimony, Uther commanded. The crowd stirred slightly as Dathrahan walked toward the stage. He stopped and stood solemnly next to Tyrion's chair. The 2 friends exchanged fleeting glances. Dathrahan could only nod sorrowfully at Tirion. Lord Commander Dathrahan, you have charged this man with treason. Please explain for the court the occurrence and the nature of this man's alleged infraction, Uther said. Dathrahan cleared his throat and straightened slightly. My lords, I do wish to state for the record that Tirion Fordring has always been a man of honour and nobility, but I cannot deny what I saw with my own eyes. 4 days ago I led a detachment into the Hearthglen woods in search of renegade orcs. Lord Fordring assisted me with the exercise and helped me to track down the orc that we currently hold in our prison for execution. When I gave the command to arrest the creature, Lord Fordring turned upon my men and attempted to set the orc free. I asked him repeatedly to desist, but he would not relent. It is with a heavy heart that I give this testimony, Dathrahan finished. Once again murmurs and hushed whispers floated through the hall. The jurors discussed Dathrahan's words as Uther addressed the court again. Is there anyone here who could give credence to Lord Commander Dathrahan's testimony? Tyrion's whole body clenched as he saw Bartholus spring up from his seat. I can, my lord, the young paladin stated excitedly. I was there, under Lord Dathrahan's command, when the incident took place. I bore witness to Tyrion's treachery first-hand. The scorn in his voice was evident when he spoke his superior's name. Tirion could hear Arden groaning behind him. Uther dismissed Dathrahan and motioned for Bartholus to come forward. Dathrahan gripped Bartholus in a searing gaze as they passed each other. Apparently, the youth's efforts to win his way into the Lord Commander's good graces were not working as well as Bartholus had planned. With surprising calm, Bartholus took his place near Tyrion's chair. His face was proud and intent. State your claim, Junior Paladin Bartholus, Uther said icily. He was obviously disgruntled by the younger paladin's lack of respect for his superior. Guilty or not, Tirion was still to be addressed by his title. Undeterred, Bartholus continued. Just as Lord Commander Dathrahan said, my lord, I saw Lord Fordring fight to save the orc from capture. He said that he had made a pact with the creature and would be damned if we incarcerated it, Bartholus said matter-of-factly. You see, I knew he was up to something. I had a feeling that this vile traitor was untrustworthy, even before we set out to capture the orc.
Silence!
Uther shouted, his voice reverberating through the chamber like thunder. He ensnared the now trembling Barthless with his overpowering gaze.
You will learn to control your tongue, Junior Paladin. I have known this man for years. We saved each other's lives more than once, and stood victorious before the enemy, more times than I can clearly remember. Whatever he may have done, he certainly deserves more than to be harangued by an unseasoned boy like yourself.
Barthless turned white as a sheet and looked as if he might faint.
Your testimony has been heard and will be reviewed by the court. You are dismissed,
Uther finished. Reddening in embarrassment, Barthless hurried back to his seat. Tirion watched as the jurors once again began to converse with one another. The four lords finished their deliberations and motioned that they were ready to proceed. Uther turned to stare down at Tirion. His gaze seemed to look straight into Tyrion's heart, searching for some explanation for his friend's unprecedented behavior.
Lord Paladin Fordring, do you have anything to say in your defense?
Uther asked Tirion levelly. Tirion stood up and solemnly addressed the court.
My lords, I know that the notion must sound preposterous, but the orc saved my life. In return, I gave him my word as a paladin that I would protect him as well. The orc's name is Hatred, and he is as honourable an opponent as I have ever faced.
Jeers and shocked gasps erupted from the assembled onlookers. Tirion continued unabated.
You must understand me when I tell you, in order to follow my orders, I would have had to betray my honour as a paladin. That I could not do. That said, I will accept whatever punishment you deem fit.
Uther strode over to the four jurors and knelt beside them. He argued with them briefly, pointing his finger as if to stress a point. After a few moments, it appeared as if the jurors had relented, and Uther walked back to the lectern victorious.
Lord Paladin Fordring, he began, this court is well aware of your long years of service in defence of Lordaeron and its allied kingdoms. Every man here is aware of your courage and valour. However, consorting with the sworn enemies of humanity, regardless of their supposed honour, is a grievous crime. In granting the orc amnesty, you took a terrible risk, and gambled the safety of Hearthglen on a personal whim. In light of your service, this court is prepared to offer you a full pardon if you will disavow your oath to the creature and reaffirm your commitment to the Alliance.
Tirion cleared his throat. It would be so easy to simply give in and go home to his wife and son. He turned to see Arden wringing his hands in anticipation.
Please, my lord, commit to them and be done with it,
Arden whispered anxiously. Tirion saw Dathrahan take a step forward as if urging him to forget about the orc and clear his good name.
Let's put this nonsense behind us, Tirion,
Dathrahan exclaimed under his breath.
Lord Paladin Fordring, what is your answer?
Uther asked suspiciously, seeing Tyrion's hesitation. Tirion braced himself and faced the court members boldly.
What is to be done with the orc, my lord?
The great paladin looked surprised by the question, but saw fit to answer anyway.
It will be executed like any other enemy of humanity. Regardless of your personal experience with the creature, it is a savage, murdering beast that cannot be allowed to live.
Tirion bowed his head and thought for a moment. He pictured Taelin's innocent face in his mind's eye. He wanted to go home so badly.
I will remain committed to the Alliance until my...
He raised his head and saw Dathrahan give him a pleased smile. The Lord Commander seemed convinced that Tirion would make the right decision. Tirion saw his course plainly. He would make the only decision honor would permit.
I will remain committed to the Alliance until my dying day. Of that I have no doubt, Tirion said confidently, but I cannot disavow the oath I took. To do so would be to betray everything I am and everything we as honourable men hold dear.
This time the entire gathering erupted in fury and shock. None could believe Tyrion's brazen decision. Even the noble jurors gaped open-mouthed at Tirion. The tired paladin thought he heard Arden weeping behind him, and his heart sank even lower. Dathrahan sat down heavily in his chair, shaking his head in dismay. Barthless seemed to be on the verge of jumping out of his seat in excitement. Many of the gathered warriors began to shout obscenities at Tirion and call him a traitor. Some spat at him as he stood motionless before the stage. Rubbing his eyes wearily, Uther motioned for the court to fall silent once more. He was beside himself with anguish over what he must do, but Tirion had stated his position clearly.
So be it,
Uther said ominously.
Tirion Fordring, from this day forth, you are no longer welcome among the Knights of the Silver Hand. You are no longer fit to bask in the grace of the light. I hereby excommunicate you from our ranks.
The audience gasped at Uther's words. Excommunication was a rare, harsh punishment that stripped a paladin of his light-given powers. Though it had only been used a few times, every paladin lived in mortal fear of it. Tirion could not fathom what was about to happen. Before he could utter another word, Uther made a sweeping motion with his hand. Immediately, Tirion felt a dark shadow pass over him, choking out the holy power of the light. Panic threatened to overwhelm him as the grace and strengthening energies of the light fled his body. The blessed energies which had been such an integral part of him for so long ebbed away just as if they had never been. Though the light of the hall never wavered, Tirion felt as if he had been wrapped in darkness and cast down into oblivion. Unable to withstand the raging despair and hopelessness that washed over him in waves, Tirion lowered his head in abject despair. Uther continued.
All trappings of our order will be stripped from you,
he said, as two paladins came forward and viciously ripped the silver plates from Tyrion's racked body.
as well as your personal titles and holdings.
Tirion struggled against despair. Never in his life had he felt so naked and powerless. Images of Talon and Karandra sifted through his tortured mind. He had to get a grip on himself. He had to think of his dignity. On wobbly legs he stood and faced the court once more.
You shall be exiled from these kingdoms and live the rest of your days amongst the wild things of the world. May the light have mercy on your soul,
Uther finished. Tirion felt dazed. His head spun and anxiety threatened to overtake him. He was barely conscious of Uther's next words to the assembly.
Though it goes against my better judgment, it is the will of this court that Paladin Bartholus take over as Regent Governor of Hearthglen effective immediately. Bartholus is to remain here to oversee the morning's hanging, and then return home to his duties. The exile, Tirion Fordring, is to be escorted back to Mardenhold Keep. There he will collect his family and be escorted to the borders of the Alliance lands. These proceedings are over,
Uther said, smashing his armored fist against the lectern. He gazed at Tirion in frustration, clearly disgusted with the trial's outcome.
My lord, I have one last question,
Tirion barely managed to say. Uther paused to listen, a final gesture of respect and friendship for his former comrade.
My wife and son, are they to be exiled as well? Will my sin damn their lives as it has mine?
Tirion asked shakily. Uther bowed his head in sorrow. The man before him was a good man. This was no way for a hero to be treated.
No, Tirion. They may remain in Lordaeron if they so desire. This was your crime, not theirs. They should not be punished for your pride,
Uther said. He then turned his back on Tirion and departed. Lost in a haze of despair and grief, Tirion was barely aware of the guards hauling him out of the Great Hall. Well, anybody that has played WoW, you know Eitrig's not going to die because he's a key person in the Horde. Tirion Fordring may or may not die. Who knows what's going to happen with that, but I don't think he's going to die yet. Alright, we got a few chapters to go, and this episode is in the pipe 5x5. Thanks everybody so much for watching and listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.